I really think that, in 50 years or 100 years, somebody's going to look back and go, wow, this moment in time was a public health crisis around the world.
The fact that our emotions are not hardwired is quite, for some people, a revolutionary concept that they might not have thought of before.
Scientists believed that the human brain was born with circuits for each emotion. The problem with that view is that 100 years of scientific evidence from multiple fields just doesn't support it. Every experience you have, every action you take, is a combination of the remembered past and the sensory present, what's going on right now in your body and in the world. And this understanding holds a key to understanding negative mood.
Depression, anxiety. A lot of people say this is a chemical imbalance and we can't retrain our emotions. What would you say?
You can think about depression as a system that doesn't have the juice to do all the things that a body and a brain would normally do. And so it tries to cut costs. And the way that it cuts costs is you start to feel fatigued. You might feel distressed. These are symptoms of a body budget in distress. That's what's affecting primarily how your brain is predicting and what signals it's paying attention to from the body and from the world. So what this means is that if emotions are built in the moment, means there's a toehold there to really be an architect of your experience. You can actually shape your own emotional life. That is a very hopeful message to people.
I've loved watching this community grow and especially starting to meet you all in the comments section. But one thing, although our views are going up, our subscribers aren't. So I'd love for you to hit the subscribe button as a thank you if you've enjoyed any of our episodes. It allows us to bring bigger, more exciting guests and more continuous content. So if you've enjoyed it, just like a gentleman's handshake, please do subscribe. Lisa, welcome to Live Well, Be Well. I am thrilled to have you on.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
I feel we are going to shock, is the word that I want to say, people in a good way about all of the fantastic research you have been doing and pioneering within neuroscience, within psychology and emotion and the human brain. Now, you are one of the top 1% most cited scientists in the world, 270 research papers. Even saying that, I know we're going to have an amazing conversation. And it's quite hard to know where to start. So I thought I'd start right at the top, right at the very beginning, which is emotions, because it's something that we'll all relate to. We'll all think we might understand, but I know that you're going to give us maybe a different interpretation. So what is your definition of emotions?
Well, even the way that you ask the question, Sarah, suggests that there's a definition of emotion which is different than a definition of cognition or of memory or of perception, because that's how it feels to us. It feels to us like when we're in the grips of an emotion, and that when we're in the grips of anger or the grips of fear or happiness or awe, that somehow something super distinct is happening, and it's very different from any form of cognition, thinking, or any form of perception like seeing or hearing. And in fact, that was the dominant view for many, many, many decades in science. And scientists believed that, the human brain was came pre-wired with specific circuits for each emotion, and that every emotion had its own, fingerprint, if you will. So, people smile in happiness, they scowl in anger, they frown in sadness. They widen their eyes and gasp in fear. The assumption was that everyone around the world made these expressions, and that they could recognize these expressions as distinct expressions of specific emotions. And similarly, that, that in fear or in anger, you have your body takes on a particular, state. So your heart raises, your blood pressure goes up or down. The assumption was that there were these very distinct, categorically distinct responses that were inborn. And if there was any variation, that variation was due to, sometimes you might cry in happiness or you might laugh in the face of fear. The assumption was that something else was happening. Maybe you were regulating your emotion. Maybe, you were deliberately changing your expression, or, that there was some other process that would come in and modify or dampen that kind of inherent prepared emotional response. The problem with that view is that 100 years of scientific evidence from multiple fields just doesn't support it. Instead, when it comes to emotion, variation is the norm. In fact, when we look, for example, at many, many, many studies, which we call a meta-analysis, meaning we're taking studies and we're analyzing the studies. For example, and this is just in Western urban cultures, 35% of the time people scowl in anger, which is more than chance. But it's not so high that you would equate scowling as being the expression of anger, because 65% of the time people are doing things that are other than scowling when they're angry. And only about half the time when people scowl are they angry. The other half of the time they're feeling something else. They might be concentrating really hard. They might be experiencing a bad bout of gas. They might be signaling that somebody just told a really bad joke. And so it might actually be a show of humor and pleasure. Variation is the norm. And this is the challenge in trying to understand what emotions are and how they work. And so in our lab, we just kind of systematically went from one set of signals to another. Like, there are supposed to be universal facial expressions. Okay, so let's look. Are there? And we did we did our own studies. We traveled to Tanzania and tested the Hadza hunter-gatherers. We went, to Namibia and tested the Himba people of the Himba culture. We analyzed thousands of studies, and we did this for the physiology of the body and also the brain, looking for these patterns. And really, instead, what we found was structured variation. And along the way, we learned something about the more basic aspects of brain function. And so we kind of shifted our strategy to, instead of starting with anger, sadness, and fear, and so on, which are not universal categories for emotion. They're in many, many cultures, but not all cultures. And there are lots of other categories that don't exist in English or in any Western culture that are very important to individual cultures. So instead of starting with the categories and looking for their physical basis, we started with a more basic question. How does the brain work? What's its most important job? How is it performing that job? And once we understand something about the physiology and the structure of the brain in its relation to the body and the world, then we can start asking questions. Well, how does it create these moments that we know and experience as emotion? But really, we're asking questions about how does it create lived experience? How does it regulate your actions? How is it that you do what you do when you do it? And what we discovered was something really consistent with what a lot of other scientists were finding, and that is your brain's main job is not feeling. It's not emoting. It's not thinking. It's not even seeing or hearing or sensing. Your brain's main job is regulating your body in a metabolically efficient way. And it's doing that all the time. And the way that it's doing that is it's remembering past events that are similar to the present. You don't experience yourself as remembering, but that is what your brain is doing. In the moment, it's remembering instances meaning it's reinstating in its wiring instances from the past that are similar to the present to predict what's going to happen in a moment from now, what you'll see, what you'll hear, and what you'll feel, and what you'll do. And those predictions, those memories, are really important for not just creating an instance of anger or sadness or fear, but they're important for seeing and hearing and acting. So your brain is basically a meaning maker. And sometimes the meaning that it makes is an emotion. It's attempting to use past experience to predict and explain incoming sensory signals from your body and from the world.
I think the fact that our emotions are not hardwired and are not predictable, well, they are predictable from our own experiences, is quite, for some people, a revolutionary concept that they might not have thought of before. Because I mentioned to you before you came on, I loved the talk that you gave about this when you started mentioning the film Pixar, which for children started teaching them, and maybe many adults, about emotions. There was 5 emotions: anger, sadness, happiness, fear, and anxiety, I think. And these little emotions sit in your brain and they kind of regulate your brain. But everything that we're describing, or you've just described, actually, that isn't correct. That isn't how emotions play out.
So what I would say is that, I first of all love Pixar movies. And if I take my scientist hat off and I just, I put my mom hat on, or just really my like human hat on, I watch the Pixar movies and I love them. I thought they were really clever. And in particular, anxiety doesn't show up until Inside Out 2. I thought she was pretty clever. I really liked Ennui. I think that was my favorite character, although I thought embarrassment was pretty funny too, actually. So I think these are and the analogies and metaphors and stuff that they're using are super clever. But claiming that that you can learn something about emotion scientifically by watching these cartoons is like claiming that you could learn physics from watching a Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote cartoon. So in the US, there's this, cartoon of a Roadrunner who's escaping from a coyote named Wile E. Coyote. He basically can run off a cliff and not fall, and anvils can fall on creatures and then they get up. You're not learning physics from watching these cartoons, but they're super fun. And the same, you're not learning psychology or neuroscience from watching Inside Out or Inside Out 2, even though it's really fun. And one thing I think that's really interesting actually about these, so just to be clear, the way the movie is depicting emotion is that there's a little essence, a little person for each emotion. And it's the same in every person's head, right? Like joy looks the same in every person's head. Maybe it has that person's hair, but it's the same essence. Even dogs and cats have those essences. So that's the equivalent of the fingerprint idea. It's very cute, but it's not scientifically accurate. And even more importantly, I think if you watch the movies really carefully, what you'll see, especially in the second movie, it's on my mind more because I just watched it recently. Every character has a full range of expressions and emotions that aren't their own. Anger feels sad, right? Sadness feels, anger, it's like they're actually full characters. That are not only experiencing and their own particular emotion. They're displaying the full range. Otherwise, they'd be totally boring to watch. So I think to us, it feels like emotions are triggered, right? It feels like we have emotions, that something happens in the world. A switch is flipped, right? And then we have the emotion and it takes us over. And that's what it feels like. But throughout the course of human history, one thing we know is true, and that is your own experience reveals very little about how the world works. People used to believe that the sun revolved around the earth because that's what it looks like on Earth, right? People used to believe all kinds of things that were grounded in their own personal experience of the world. And science is a slow march really away from that. And so in particular with the brain, with the human brain is so fascinating because it creates experiences with such, in stealth. First of all, it doesn't make itself aware of its construction process, but also it's so vivid and so, it's so real. In fact, it is real that it misleads. I mean, brains mislead themselves as to how they work, and that's part of the challenge, that we have experiences. So, for example, a lot of people still believe that, anger, all instances of anger they have a family resemblance to one another. And then I start asking questions. Well, have you ever seen somebody withdraw in anger? Have you ever seen somebody laugh in anger? Have you ever felt yourself where you wanted to cry in anger? Have you ever, and I start sort of pointing out this variation, and they're like, oh yeah, oh, okay, yeah. So the real question here is first of all, how is the brain understanding this variation? It's not random variation. It's very structured. Sarah, if I were to measure you, we have these experiments that we do where we wire people up with, and they carry around kind of like very, very, very fancy, wearables, except they're research grade wearables. Okay. And we measure people's, physical signals, like say their heart rate. So let's say I was measuring your heart rate, and I would know something about your baseline heart rate because I would have tested that in advance. And so anytime your heart rate increases or decreases, say 15% from your baseline, and you're not moving very much, that means the heart rate change is a reflection that there's been some kind of state change in your brain, because there are no other reasons for the heart rate change. It's not like you've started walking quickly, or all of a sudden you started breathing differently because we're measuring that, right? So, and so then that's when we ask people we sample their experience in those moments when there's been some physical change that's not accounted for by their physical actions. And what we learn is that there's incredible variation in the instances of anger that you yourself, if we were to measure you, that you yourself feel. But it's structured by the situations that you're in. So somehow the brain has to make sense of this tremendous complexity and variation. And the real question is, why is it that why did your brain in that moment construct anger as opposed to sadness or happiness or awe or what have you? So how is the brain making choices, making decisions about what is similar in this moment to something in the past? That's really the question. And why do people believe that anger and sadness and fear and so on are these stable, fixed categories, when in fact there's so much variability? And if we were not good at detecting and making meaning of that variability, we wouldn't be able to live productive lives. So clearly there's this disconnect, and it's a super, super interesting question.
I'm so pleased to partner with Squarespace, the all-in-one platform to help entrepreneurs stand out and succeed online. Whether you're just starting out or managing a growing brand, Squarespace makes it easy to create a beautiful website, engage your audience, and sell anything from products to content all in one place. I've been using Squarespace since day one because it's accessible and it looks professional, even for a tech phobe like me. Squarespace gives you all the tools to create and sell your own online courses. I launched my own Inner Circle membership last year using their platform. You can upload videos, customize your layouts, and add a paywall to monetize your content. Now, if you're looking to grow your business, the email campaigns feature is a game changer. It allows you to create targeted email campaigns, engage your community, drive sales, and track success with built-in analytics. Head to squarespace.com/livewell for your free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use the offer code LIVEWELL for 10% off a website or domain. I think just hearing that, even when you're explaining it, makes me feel like I can manage my emotions even better, because I'm starting to understand the construct of the past that's predicting how I'm feeling. And actually, the things that I change today can predict how I change my emotions going forward from tomorrow, which is quite a powerful reframing tool to think about it.
Exactly. So there are a couple of really interesting things about this notion that every moment, every experience you have, every action you take is a combination of the remembered past and the sensory present, what's going on right now in your body and in the world. So it's always a combination of those two. Sometimes it's a little more of one, sometimes it's a little more of the other, but it's always a combination of those two. So what this means is that, first of all, if emotions are being made on the spot and they're not built into your brain from birth, they're built in the moment. First of all, it means there's a toehold there to have more control over your experience, to really be an architect of your experience in a way. You're not just reacting to emotions that are triggered and attempting to dampen them down or what have you. You can actually shape your own emotional life to some extent. The way that control doesn't look the way that most people think about control, as kind of inhibiting some, response, like, I really want that, extra piece of chocolate cake, or I really want to have one more drink, or, I really want to tell my boss to go screw himself, or, I really want to, yell at the top of my lungs because I'm frustrated, or what have you. Right. And then it's like inhibiting yourself from engaging in those behaviors. And certainly there are instances like that, but for the most part, control really is more preemptive. It's more about setting up your interactions and your life and paying attention in ways that where the brain directs itself essentially to remember and predict things differently. You can, just in the same way that you exercise to, and what you're doing when you exercise, sometimes you're honing your predictions. Like if you're trying to run a faster mile, or if you're trying to perfect a tennis swing, what you're doing there is you're honing your predictions so that your brain is predicting better, faster, more efficiently, so that you can run that faster mile. You can be more efficient and more precise in that tennis swing. Other times we're exercising to throw ourselves out of, to make it harder for the brain to predict. That's interval training. So you're basically throwing yourself into chaos, and your brain is learning to bring itself back, into flow or into metabolic efficiency. That's what you're doing when, a trainer is calling out to you every 30 seconds and you have to do something different. It's a constant stream of prediction errors that you have to adjust to. And so you're expending a lot of energy to kind of condition your brain in a sense. We always think about exercise as conditioning the body, and it does condition, your limbs and your cardiovascular system and so on, but it's also conditioning your brain and to function better and to make a sort of healthier, future you. And you can also do this with emotions. You can cultivate new experiences for yourself. You can expose yourself to people who are different than you. You can travel and, experience emotional lives that are very, very different from your own. There are many things that you can do, but the point is, and you said it really beautifully, what you're doing is you're exposing yourself, you're cultivating experiences that are novel, which is an opportunity for your brain to learn more ways of predicting. So you're essentially cultivating your past, right? You're cultivating experiences that will diversify your brain's ability to predict, which will help your brain be more effective at predicting in the future. So you're constantly cultivating your past for the purposes of, you're investing energy in learning new things for the purposes of improving your future self. That is, I think, a very hopeful message to people. I kind of always want to give the caveat that, doing this is harder than it seems. It's not always pleasant. Even for me, I've been doing this for a long time now. I use these strategies in my own life. My family uses them. My students use them. They're hard. They sometimes feel like shit. You're struggling, just like when you're exercising, you get to a point where your oxygen, your carbon dioxide load is a little too high, and you start to feel really unpleasant. That doesn't really mean that anything is wrong. It just means now you've hit that edge where, my trainer always likes to say, now change is really happening. Sometimes things can still feel hard and bad. It doesn't necessarily mean something's wrong. It can mean that you're just doing something really hard that will have positive impact on your future self.
I think that gives so much hope. And it's a question I didn't have, but it's one that's just come to my mind as we're talking about low mood. So depression, anxiety. A lot of people say this is a chemical imbalance and we can't retrain our emotions. How would you, for people that are kind of like listening to this, thinking about retraining their brain and suffering with that, what would you say?
So what I will say is that everything I'm about to say is based on my understanding of the current status of the science. But I became really interested. I've always studied mood as a scientist, but I became much more interested in these questions of anxiety and depression. I've always kind of been interested in them, but my daughter, when she was an adolescent, became clinically depressed. And I do what I always do. I go to the literature and I try to figure out what's going on in a way to help her. And I should say that, she's 25 now, and I've just started talking about this because she's old enough to give her consent. So I'm talking about this with her consent. But here's the thing that I realized. Your brain its most important job is regulating and coordinating the systems of your body. And this understanding holds a key to understanding negative mood. So we don't walk around, we don't experience ourselves or the world as having anything to do with our metabolism or the state of our body or how well our organs are working or anything like that, right? We don't experience every hug we give, every insult we bear, every emotion we experience. We don't experience this as having anything to do with glucose metabolism or how much salt we have or what's the pH of our blood or anything like that. But that turns out to be super important under the hood. And the technical term for the brain's predictive control of the body is allostasis, not homeostasis, but allostasis. But I like to use the metaphor of body budgeting. So your brain, and this is a metaphor, okay? All metaphors are wrong, but some metaphors are useful for sort of encapsulating something important. So that's what we're doing here. We're using, this is a really, I think, really powerful metaphor. I've heard at this point from tens of thousands of people actually that they find this a useful metaphor. Your brain is running a budget for your body. It's not budgeting money. It's budgeting glucose and salt and oxygen. And it's budgeting all of the chemicals and nutrients that are necessary to keep you alive and keep you well. And it's budgeting in a predictive way. And meaning it's anticipating the needs of the body and attempting to meet those needs before they arise, because that's actually the most metabolically efficient way, the energy efficient way to run any system is to anticipate the needs of the system and make sure the resources are there where the system needs them, when they need them. And if you think about it, it's also a good way to run your own financial budget, to spend money once it's there, as opposed to, right? Because if you borrow money, you pay interest, man. And that interest can add up really fast. which is also true of a body budget.
My number one rule is that health should be personalized and tailored to the individual. But it can be hard to do if we don't know where our current health status is. Are you someone who's been trying countless supplements and health trends but end up feeling no different? Before you even start thinking about these things, it's crucial to assess where your health status currently is. That's where Optimally Me can make a world of difference. Optimally Me is a health optimization platform that provides personalized health recommendations based on your unique biology and goals. It offers access to a variety of diagnostic blood tests, digital tools, and devices, helping you see the bigger picture of your health, whether it's metabolic, gut, hormone, mental, skin, or cardiovascular health. This is where your foundation of health should start, with the understanding of where it currently stands. What I love about Optimally Me is it allows you to analyze your health biomarkers and personalize your health journey. You can start your personalized journey with the full body MOT and DNA epigenetics blood tests. These tests assess multiple areas of your health and determine how lifestyle and environment are aging your body. Once you have your comprehensive health overview, you can start to connect your wearable devices and work with expert health coaches using the Optimally Me dashboard to support your health. And here is a little something for you. Use the code LWBW20 to get 20% off your order, because your health is personal, and so should your health plan. I'm thinking of my P&L right now as you're talking about this. Exactly the same.
In general, the way we generally think about mood is that your brain is always regulating your body. Your body is always sending signals back to your brain it's reporting on the metabolic state of the body, all the cells and this nutrient and that nutrient. And the brain makes itself aware, not of all those little details, but it makes itself aware of the metabolic status of the body as mood. So when you're feeling pretty good, it means body budgeting is going pretty well. When you're feeling unpleasant, it probably means that you're running a deficit momentarily. Like when you're exercising, right? You feel fine and then you start to feel like shit. And it's because, you're draining, your probably lactic acid is building up and the pH of your blood is changing slightly. And, you're building up a deficit, which you replenish, right? You pay back what you spend by drinking water and, having electrolytes and maybe eating something and, so on and so forth. The thing is that, and when you're learning something new, sometimes it feels unpleasant because it's hard and it's more expensive to learn something new than to just go with your predictions. But we could talk about, what are the metabolic savings? What are taxes? How does that work? But the more important point about depression is that depression is basically a bankrupt body budget. You can think about depression as a system that doesn't have the juice. It just doesn't have the metabolic resources to do all the things that a body and a brain would normally do. And so it tries to cut costs. And the way that it cuts costs is you start to feel fatigued. You start to not want to move very much. You might feel distressed. Basically, these are symptoms of a body budget in distress. And so, your immune system, for example, if you have peripheral inflammation if you have systemic inflammation throughout your body, your immune system is super expensive metabolically. And there's this intimate relationship between energy regulation and your immune system. So if you are overspending, eventually your immune system can kick in for various reasons. There are various technical reasons why this is the case. It's also the case that if you have persistent inflammation that's elevated due to, COVID, diabetes, heart disease, any kind of autoimmune illness, right? That basically that will be like an extra tax that you're paying. systematically, and it will drain your body budget over time. So instead of asking, how come people who have heart disease are more likely to become depressed, in the sense that, like, how does heart disease cause depression? How we approach things is say, okay, well, there's a common set of causes here. And that is that there's some set of metabolic problems which are at the root of both of those sets of symptoms. Every physical illness has mood-related symptoms that go with it. And every mood disorder, which people think of as psychological, has some physical basis, usually in immune function or in metabolic function. And so this is, I think, a key insight, right? So one thing to understand is that sometimes when you're feeling really distressed or really dragged out, it's not because something is wrong with the world. It's not because you're a bad person. It could be that you are just running you're having a budgeting deficit, and you just need a little self-care. Sometimes there are things that are wrong in the world that are draining your body budget. And sometimes there is something wrong with your body. There is a physical problem that is causing unnecessary expense. But sometimes, especially, we live in a world that is full of uncertainty, which is incredibly expensive. And
expensive on your brain, you mean, don't you?
It's expensive on your brain. Yes.
Yeah, and energy.
Exactly. And for anxiety is sort of, there's a similar story there. Just very quickly, what does your brain attempt to do when there's uncertainty? Because uncertainty is expensive. It's expensive because the brain has to maintain multiple predictions over long periods of time. That's just expensive. So it's really, and so the reason why your brain is predicting as it is to try to reduce uncertainty, to make perception and experience and action manageable in a only partially predictable but ever-changing world. And if your brain can't predict in advance what you will see and hear, you'll basically experience noise. You won't have, it's called experiential blindness. You just will. I have examples of this, and in talks that I give, where I show people something and they can't see anything. It's just a bunch of blobs. And then I teach them something that allows them to predict, and all of a sudden they see an object. And it wasn't there before, but now it is. They're looking at exactly the same image, but now they see something they didn't see before, because everything you see is partially in your head and partially in the world. Everything you see is partially the remembered past and partially the sensory present. If the sensory present stays the same, but you change the remembered past, now people can see something that they didn't see before. And so if your brain can't reduce the uncertainty, it will attempt to take in that error, the signals that it couldn't predict, which we call prediction error. And so it's doing something that we have a fancy name for in science. We call it learning. Your brain is learning. And when learning happens, or when the brain is attempting to learn, there is a change in certain neurochemicals that can increase your heart rate, increase your speed, your breathing rate, that can basically make you feel jittery and activated. And if that persists over a long period of time, people experience that as anxiety. So oftentimes anxiety is uncertainty. You can kind of dissolve the anxiety, and you can in its place experience uncertainty. The physical sensations are the same, but the incoming sensory signals are the same, but you're giving a different meaning to them. And by remembering differently. And as a consequence, your brain will plan and do things that are different, right? In anxiety, we withdraw. In uncertainty, we forage for information, right? Or another example I give in the book and I often use, when my daughter was 12, she was testing for her black belt in karate. And, her sensei was a 10th degree black belt, which in the United States is the highest you can be. So this guy was like, he could like break a board by looking at it. Okay. That's how strong he was. He was just like really strong. And she's this tiny little 5-foot, girl basically. And she has to spar with all of these like hulking boys who are like a foot taller than her, much stronger than her. And this is what she's going to have to do for her black belt. And her sensei kind of saunters up to her, and he just puts his hands on his hips and he looks at her and he says, "Get your butterflies flying in formation." And I thought, wow, that is a great concept. So in what he just did there, he didn't say, "Calm down, little girl," because calmness is not what she needs. She actually needs that energy. What he did was he transformed the meaning of those sensations from anxiety into determination. And this is something the research shows that anybody can learn to do this, and that it has very profound effects on people's lives. It's not always easy to do, but it's doable.
I think that's the biggest thing, right? It's not always the easiest. The reframing part is it's going to be built like a habit. And I think that's the thing you've got to keep to.
And we have a lot of names for it. We call it reappraisal or reframing or what have you. But really and this is how you know something is important, in psychology, and is that the people get, or maybe in science, is that you have a phenomenon and people give like 5,000 names to it. It's really what your brain is doing is it's issuing a set of predictions, which we describe as a concept or a category. But basically it's creating a different meaning. And usually in all cases, meaning making starts as predictions. Then if the predictions are to be corrected, the meaning making changes. And that's when we call it reframing or reappraisal. But if your brain is trained, if your brain has trained itself to predict flexibly, then your initial prediction will be the better one. And that's what habit forming is. I mean, of course, habits can also be bad, and that also requires retraining your brain. But the point is that a habit is just the first set of predictions that your brain makes that it goes with.
So do you think that's where meditation and mindfulness come in quite well? Just thinking about like bringing it back to the present and really refocusing. That's probably like such a powerful tool.
Yes, exactly, Sarah. So what drives your predictions? Well, basically the state that you're currently in is very much determined by what you are attending to and what you are ignoring. And what I mean by that is there's this really useful concept. This is not a metaphor. This is actually a scientific concept called a niche. So the world right now for you, for me, for all of our listeners, their immediate world is just filled with gazillions of signals. Some of those signals are relevant. They are relevant to that person, and some are not. The ones that are relevant to you are in your niche. So, for example, right now, there are sensory signals that your brain is tracking, but they're not in consciousness because they're not really relevant to you. Like, if you're sitting, then, I'm about to say it now. And then as soon as I say it, your attention will go there and it will become in your consciousness. But I'm sitting, and if I pay attention, I can feel the seat of my chair pressing up against my legs. If I listen really carefully, I could probably hear sounds outside, like birds chirping or the air conditioner blowing, or right. So there are some signals that will never be in my niche because I don't have sensory surfaces for them, like, ultraviolet. Actually, ultraviolet lights are always in your niche. That's why you wear sunscreen. But, I don't know, radio, things that you don't have sensors for, that you might need special technical tools to translate those signals into something you can sense. The things that you can't sense that are really, you just don't have sensory surfaces for, are never in your niche because they're not affecting you. They're not interacting with your body or your brain in some way. But there are a lot of signals that we're sort of ignoring, but that are there. And if you were to pay attention to them, they would actually shift how the brain predicts. That's what mindfulness is. It's basically, if you want to change how your brain is predicting, you can just, in the moment, you can just get up and move to another location. But if you can't physically move, you can shift your attention, and that will shift your predictions. So you can you can become aware of, train your brain to track signals that normally it wouldn't be very concerned with. And when you do this is partly how we become expert at things. So, if you've ever learned to play piano, or you've ever learned to paint, or you've ever learned any kind of skill, what you're learning to do is to pay attention to signal differences in signals that before you ignored those differences. And you're learning to make more precise categories. And this is basically a way of becoming more granular in the way that you use the past for the purposes of creating lived experience and controlling actions in the present. So mindfulness is useful because when you start attending to small details that you were ignoring before, this changes how your brain predicts in the next moment, and therefore it changes what you do and what you feel.
I want to share something that's helped my skincare routine, the Bon Charge Red Light Face Mask. Red light therapy is fantastic for your skin because it helps reduce inflammation and increases collagen production, making your skin look healthier and more youthful. The Bon Charge Red Light Face Mask uses the optimal wavelengths of red 630 nanometers and infrared 850 nanometers light to deliver these benefits. Now, someone in my early 30s, wrinkles aren't a huge issue yet, but the minor lines I did have are already smoothed out. And what really surprised me was how well this mask works for acne. It helps settle the acne quicker and reduces any dark spots afterwards. It's been a real game changer for those unexpected breakouts. Now, prevention is key for me, and using this mask is a great step to help reduce the signs of aging. It's also become vital in my self-care routine. And during this time, I incorporate the meditation practice, making it one of my favorite times of the day. So if you're curious about how red light therapy can help your skin, I highly recommend giving it a try. Go to boncharge.com/livewell and use the code LIVEWELL for 15% off your order. It's the power, and it's so simple, but I think that people realize the power of how amazing it can be at reframing these moments and being in the moment. I think like something that I really want to make sure that I don't skip on was on the low mood with depression as well, because there's a lot more I want to ask you about anxiety. But would you say that if people are now listening to this and saying, okay, metabolically taxing, maybe I'm on low reserves, and they start changing their diet, they start putting in these tools, they start being more aware, do you think there's a place for SSRIs? That's kind of what I was hearing, but what's your concept on that?
Yeah, so I think that, so first of all, what I'm about to give you is my opinion now. Okay, this is my speculation. This is my speculation based on what I SSRIs. So yeah, I do think there's a role for SSRIs for sure. For some people. And here's what I mean. What an SSRI will do is kind of juice the system. Okay, so what an SSRI does is allows serotonin and other monoamines. So most SSRIs also work on norepinephrine and other monoamines, just like an SNRI, like Wellbutrin, works on serotonin. There's a whole chemical family there, right? And what an SSRI does is it will leave those chemicals in synapses in the gaps between neurons longer. So functionally what it does is it lets an animal like a human or a rat or whatever act, to expend energy to act when there's no immediate reward, meaning there's no immediate replenishment. There's no immediate payback for what they've spent. So they can spend a little more for a little longer, which we would experience as having energy or being able to pay attention longer, without an immediate replenishment. That's what SSRIs do. Okay, so imagine a case where your brain is predicting that there's some metabolic deficit somewhere, and therefore it's reducing costs. So you're fatigued, you're not paying attention very well to what's around you. Most of your experiences and your actions are based on what's in your head, the predictions, the remembered past, and not so much on what's in the world. These are all symptoms of depression, right? I'm describing them in different ways. If you give a person like that an SSRI, it will really help. The reason why it will help is that updating those predictions, learning is expensive. And if your brain is on, a radical savings mode, it's not going to learn. It's not going to update itself. So giving an SSRI in those conditions, when depressed mood is caused by the brain misbelieving, basically, it's got the wrong set of beliefs. It's predicting incorrectly, and therefore it needs some extra juice to learn. An SSRI in that case will be really helpful, assuming the SSRI is maybe necessary in that case, but it's not sufficient. The person has to still be in an environment where there is something to learn, right? I mean, if they're in an environment where that's really, really draining their body budget, an SSRI is not going to help even that person, right? But let's imagine that, okay, but imagine you have a different scenario. Now you have depressed mood, not because the brain is misbelieving that there's a body budgeting deficit. There is a body budgeting. There's something wrong. Maybe you have heart disease. Maybe you have diabetes. Maybe you have some kind of subtle, mitochondrial problem. Maybe you have chronic inflammation. The point being that there's a real metabolic load on your system that your brain is attempting to deal with. If you give that person SSRIs, they will feel better for a little bit of time, and then they'll feel worse. Because what are you doing? You're juicing a system that is persistently in deficit. So basically, you're just driving that person further into deficit by giving them SSRIs. And I think, personally, this is my opinion, and this is speculation. It's speculation. But I think not understanding that I'm not reducing everything to metabolism. I'm just saying there's this extra piece that people are ignoring. Not understanding this in this pervasive use of SSRIs without considering these kinds of additional factors there is a group of people who will be persistently depressed, remitting. It might drive them actually make their depression worse. Because they were taking SSRIs. So I think in some cases it's warranted, and I think in some cases it isn't. And I think you have to there are no differences in the symptoms that people experience based on the causes of the brain's body budgeting, right? You have to actually consider these other factors.
That brings such a big conversation into my mind that I was having last week about preventative healthcare. So we don't actually look at where our systems are, right? So we're going in with external mood symptoms like I've got very low mood or I'm very anxious, but we're not looking at anything metabolically within our health system of where we are. And so it comes into that conversation of, if you look at the SMILES trial by Felice Jackie, the first kind of very big study that was conducted on clinical depressed people, and 2/3 went into remission from diet alone. And then a lot of people will say, well, I don't have the energy, as you said, to start that transition. So that's when an SSRI can help for people to feel that they have a bit more energy to start making these lifestyle changes. But such a big conversation around this is that, like, we don't actually look at the body when we're thinking about depression. We're looking just at the mind. And if we just think that we're going to plaster a tablet on it and not look at anything else, I think that's why such a large percentage of people can just feel so stuck in that category.
I think that's part of it. I think that we don't understand that the mind is a manifestation of physical things. If you don't have a brain and a body, you don't have a mind. Your mind is this idea that mind and body are connected is not metaphorical. It's real. It's like physically, biologically real. But I think that there's something else, and that is also people tend to look for simple single causes. Well, if I just change my diet, that will be enough. Or if I just change the silver bullet, it's the diet. The silver bullet is my microbiome. The silver bullet, it's sleep. If I just eat more blueberries, I'll have more energy. This is not, the body and the brain are complex systems. The number of things that can impact your mood in small ways is astronomically high. And complexity doesn't mean, oh, wow, this is super complex and hard. I mean, it does mean that, but it also means there are many, 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 many causal factors, each of which has a very small effect on its own, it's like a nudge in one direction or other. But you add them all together, you put them all together, and they interact in a way that produces a very big effect. And so it's important to consider as many factors as you can. I mean, you can change your diet, you can try to optimize your sleep, you can take SSRIs, but if you're still living in an environment filled with chaos, you're still going to have problems, because that's what's affecting primarily how your brain is predicting and what signals it's paying attention to from the body and from the world. And I think this is important, because I really think that, in 50 years or 100 years, if somebody's going to look back and go, wow, this moment in time was a public health crisis around the world, because our niche is much bigger now. My niche is not just what's in front of me. I read things in the paper about people halfway across the world. I can see things on social media that I would not normally be exposed to. And so my niche is now massively big. That didn't happen before. When people talk about the issues of social media, they don't talk about this, right? And also we have, I suppose there are always wars, and there are always, political upheavals, but we don't get to see them on a day-to-day basis in our living rooms. Like, we don't get to see what we see now, which is, it's good that we see it. On the one hand, you want to know when someone's suffering or when someone's doing well, but it adds a metabolic load. And then on top of that, there's economic instability. There's climate change, which isn't just a psychological load. There are physical changes. Like, one thing that I was just trying to understand yesterday was, small changes in the carbon dioxide level in your blood can change your mood, because it changes the pH slightly of your blood, which is very, very, very controlled by your brain, very tightly controlled, the pH of your blood. And so I was asking myself, well, how much does climate change put more it puts more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, but does that actually change? How does that, are we breathing any of that? There are these reports of increased anxiety and depression in certain areas that also happen to have more pernicious effects of climate change. Is that just people worrying about their future, or is there some kind of physical effect? It could be really small, could be super small, but in combination with all these other things, it adds up to a really big effect. I don't have an answer for that question, but there is ongoing research that is looking at the effects of small changes in carbon dioxide levels affecting animals in ways that I think the average person would find really, really, really surprising.
It makes me think that when you exhale, you're breathing out carbon dioxide, which actually makes you more relaxed. So they say to get you into a more relaxed state, do more breath work to exhale out the carbon dioxide.
Well, that's also because when you do breath work, you are practicing the only way that you it's affecting your cardiovascular system in very complex ways. So, but a lot of people practice breath work and they don't find it doesn't help them. They don't find any relief from it. And that's because it's just more complicated. It's not, you can box breathe until you're blue, you could box breathe and practice. And for some people that works, but for a lot of people it doesn't, because there are many other factors at play here. And sometimes there is research now, we'll see if it replicates, but there is some research to suggest that the reason why breath work is working is not because it is mainly because you're paying attention to your breath. And so you're distracting yourself. You've changed your focus of attention. And really it's just a change of focus of attention. So I'm not saying that's a justified claim. I'm just saying there are some scientists who are actually investigating that. I think the thing to remember is there's no magic silver bullet.
That's the thing.
There are multiple effects, and they can be very small, but together they add up to a pretty big effect.
This whole conversation centers around a topic that is exploding, which is stress. Now, I think we might blow people's minds when you might tell us that the stress response or the stress hormone shouldn't be referred to as that. So we talk a lot about cortisol, and a lot of people say this is the stress hormone, and we will then get a fight and flight response. So this is like a very big conversation that's been going on now for like the last 5 years. Tell us why that's incorrect.
Well, first of all, cortisol is a hormone that your brain directs your adrenal glands to secrete into the bloodstream. Its main effect is to help cells metabolize glucose quickly and efficiently. So you're going to have a cortisol release. There's always cortisol in your blood, but you're going to have more cortisol in your blood in moments where your brain is predicting that there's going to be a big metabolic outlay. So when is that going to happen? That's going to happen right before you drag your ass out of bed in the morning. Like right before you get up out of bed, you're going to have a cortisol surge. Whether or not you're worrying about what's happening in the day, like you could be feeling very pleasant and really looking forward to your day, and you will still have a cortisol surge to get out of bed. You're going to have a cortisol surge before you exercise. You're going to have a cortisol surge whenever your brain is predicting that there's a big metabolic outlay. So what is stress? Stress is your brain predicting that there's a big metabolic outlay. Basically, cortisol, its job is to regulate glucose metabolism. It's part of the regulatory system of glucose metabolism. It's not specific to those moments that when you feel like crap. Okay? So that's the first thing. The second thing is stress is just a moment where your brain has predicted that there's a big metabolic outlay and there's about to be a big withdrawal from your body budget. That's all stress is. It's nothing more than that. So that can happen when, there are scientists who talk about good stress and bad stress. Good stress is when your brain predicts there's a big metabolic outlay, and there is a big metabolic outlay, like when you exercise or when you go to write a test, or those are moments of good stress because your brain has made a prediction. The prediction is correct. You do the spending and then you replenish what you spend. If you have a life like that, it's full of stress, but it's good stress. It's what scientists would call good stress. The problem happens when your brain starts to mispredict. If your brain is predicting a big metabolic outlay, like I have to go into a meeting and deal with this person who I dislike and I don't trust. And so I have to pay more attention and it's going to be unpleasant, right? Or, I have to go to the doctor and I have to have a painful medical procedure, or, and then it turns out, it's not really that. So when you don't anticipate something requiring a big metabolic outlay, and it does, in moments where your brain is mispredicting, it will secrete, there'll be a flush of cortisol, and it won't necessarily be used, or it will come too late. When that happens, and if that happens persistently, then you have cortisol dysregulation, which means if you're flush with cortisol all the time, and most of the time you don't need it, the cells become insensitive to cortisol, and then they can't utilize it as well when they do need it. And now you have a metabolic dysregulation that is system-wide. So that's just one example, but basically that's the first piece of answering your question. Stress is a moment where the brain has predicted there is a big effort that's required. That's it. And if there really is a big effort and you fail to replenish what you spend, that's going to have lasting effects, right? If it over time, if that continues to happen. If you're mispredicting and you're not learning, that's going to have effects over time. That's the first piece. The second piece is there are no fight or flight circuits in your brain. Okay, we just published a paper a couple of months ago showing that this was the case. The circuits in your brain that are for fight or flight, and I put that in like scare quotes or whatever, are really circuits for regulating your body. Okay, they're engaged all the time. They're engaged when you're doing really simple things. Like we put people in a really powerful magnet so we could image their brains, really powerful, so we could see deep into the small subcortical areas of the brain. And we had people do a task that's easier than remembering a phone number. Basically, we'd show them, it's called an N-back task. It's a memory task. We show them a letter like N, the letter N for Nancy, N. And then on the next few seconds later, we show them another letter like the letter P. And we say, same or different. Those two letters are different. And then we show them another letter a couple of seconds later. Maybe it's an F for Fred. Same or different? Different. Then we show them another F. Same or different? The same. And that's the task. And they also did a harder version of the task where they had to keep track of the letter 3 trials back. Okay? So that's a harder task. But even on this really simple task, which we would call a 1 back, you're only remembering 1 trial back. So like a couple of seconds ago, are you seeing the same thing as you saw a couple of seconds ago? Yes or no? Way easier than remembering a phone number. We saw modulation in the areas where those circuits are. Those circuits are not for fight or flight. They're driven hard when the brain predicts that you need to withdraw and flee, or when you need to step up and fight and confront. Those circuits are driven hard in those moments because those are effortful moments. But those circuits are not specific to those moments. They are always working all the time because they're part of the machinery that the brain is using to regulate your cardiovascular system, your respiratory system, your metabolism, and so on and so forth.
So why did that come up? Why has fight and flight been such a used term if now we're seeing that actually it doesn't exist?
Well, it's still I didn't say it doesn't. I didn't say fight and flight don't exist. They exist as behaviors, but they don't have dedicated circuits. People are not exhausted because their fight and flight circuits are overworked. They're exhausted because they're swimming in a sea of uncertainty where they can't predict very well. And probably they're suffering from body budgeting deficits that they're unaware of, because modern life is if I were going to architect a system that would bankrupt people metabolically, it would be the one that we live in. You know, I mean, if you just in How Emotions Are Made, the first book that I published, I listed like a whole slew of things that on their own would be hard, but you add up all of those together and then add up additional things like for adolescents, their bodies are just harder to regulate because of hormones. The body is just harder to regulate in those moments, right? Or menopause, for example, or pregnancy. I mean, like I think that, like not everything, as I said, not everything is reducible to metabolism, but metabolism plays a role in everything that is mental. We're just not used to thinking of it that way. And so I think that I'll just say now that when I am having a moment where I feel like the world is ending, and I still have moments like that because I'm human, the first thing I ask myself is, did I get enough sleep? Not should I leave my husband, what do I do about my, boss who drives me up the fucking wall? No, I don't. The first thing I think is, do I need water? Did I get enough sleep? Do I need a hug from someone? Maybe I should also have a small piece of chocolate. I'm asking myself, I'm not eating for comfort. I'm like, right, when I feel really dragged out, the first thing I do is not eat, because it's easy to confuse fatigue from body budgeting problems, from a body budgeting deficit with hunger, because your brain is used to predicting that when you eat food, you'll have energy. And when you're feeling fatigued and dragged out, what you're feeling is a lack of energy. And right. So, but I have to ask myself, and I do literally, I've trained myself to check in on my stomach. Am I feeling lightheaded from not eating? No. Oh, in my stomach, is it grumbling? Oh no. Okay. Probably I'm just fatigued. And then the first thing I do is have a glass of ice water, because when you're dehydrated, if you're drinking coffee all day or soda all day or whatever, you can ironically still become dehydrated. And the first sign of dehydration is not thirst, but fatigue. And there's this research showing that if you drink enough water in the morning, in the afternoon, you're not falling asleep at your desk. But again, fatigue is it doesn't have one cause. It has all these little causes with small effects on their own, but they add up to something big. So I think it's just a different way of anticipating and understanding your mood and the causes of your mood. And don't get me wrong, I've been divorced. I've had, my daughter was depressed. Every day is not a cakewalk in my life. Shit's happening all around the world. Sometimes I feel like it's on fire, just like everybody else. Sometimes are things wrong in the world. And sometimes there are things wrong in my body, because, I'm 61 years old almost. But the point is that I'm not thinking about everything as solely mental. I'm always thinking, well, all mental events, every moment of lived experience also has a physical basis. And I'm starting to also pay attention to that, because it gives you a set of tools for living.
The awareness and the presence. This is your wise wisdom, Lisa, that you are bringing to us. And the architect of your life does give a lot of people hope. And I feel like this conversation has shown that even in those moments, to stop and check in with your body and even ask that question as you would a friend. There's a lot of compassion that I kind of hear in your kind of answers when you're talking to yourself. It's kind of like a foundational approach to start harnessing your mind and your brain for these predictions, to actually give yourself a moment, as opposed to accepting that this is just how it is.
Absolutely. And, honestly, I think a lot of people, this is like a blanket statement, which is probably not true, but it's a generalization. But I think a lot of people have a lot more trouble being compassionate to themselves than they do showing compassion to others. And there is this, of course, I mean, I live in the US, it's not the same everywhere, even in parts of the US, not the same everywhere. But I think in general, there's this belief, at least here, that you should push through you should be a trooper. You should be a hero in your own life. You should push through. And sometimes that's right. Sometimes that is the right strategy. But sometimes you just need to give yourself a break. Like sometimes a little bit of self-care can go a long way from preventing. And I'm not necessarily saying, I'm not giving a plug to the wellness industry. I mean, I think, the whole wellness industry is plugging into this feeling that people have where they're constantly feeling like, overwhelmed and distressed, and they're trying to find solutions, and they're looking for solutions. But I think sometimes the solutions are simpler than you might think. Sometimes a little bit of self-care can really go a long way to preventing a catastrophic body budgeting deficit.
We're going to follow this episode, by the way, with Dr. Kirsten Neff, who's coming on next week. So she talks a lot about self-compassion. So we'll try and get people to foster the self-compassion after this, which will be... I just want to say one more thing. The narrative that we have in our culture is thoughts cause feelings. So if you think bad thoughts, it will cause bad feelings. But evidence from the predictive brain, the predictive functioning of the brain, suggests that predictions are the basis of feelings and also the basis of thoughts. And in this moment, if your brain is taking stock of everything that's occurring in this moment, including your feeling, right? Including the feelings it's creating mental features as feelings, or feelings as mental features. It's using elements of the moment in the moment to remember or draw on events from the past, and remember those and treat them as predictions. So you can also think about feelings causing thoughts, which means that if you feel like shit, if you feel terrible, you are more likely to make predictions about the world being terrible and about you being a terrible person. And you have to remember that can just be the lens of, being in a body budgeting deficit. It's like you're looking at the world through affective colored lenses. Sometimes at the end of a really long day, when it's been a difficult day and you're really feeling like the world is ending and it's terrible. Like if you just had a horrible time and you're feeling terrible, sometimes the right thing to do is have a hot bath, go to bed, and tomorrow you wake up and it will be a slightly better day. Sometimes you just have to remember that your affect is real in the sense that it's based in the physical reality of what's happening to you under the hood. But it's not necessarily it's a barometer of the metabolic status of your body, or what your brain believes the metabolic status of your body is. But it's not necessarily revealing the truth of your life to you in that moment, the truth of your whole life, It's temporary. It's temporary. I think that's the power of it. Lisa, I have to leave you with one question, which I just feel like is going to encompass everything of today. What does live well, be well mean to you?
I think it means what we've just been talking about throughout this whole time. I mean, I think it means that you have to try to live your best life and be the best version of yourself that you can. And that doesn't mean being perfect. It means realizing that you're an animal living, you're a brain, you're a brain that is constantly having to deal with your body and the world, which is also filled with other really unpredictable brains and bodies, right? that's what, and so, living well means having a set of tools, which I think come from science personally. Like everything I'm telling you is my best understanding of how to translate the science that I know into a set of tools for living. And the other thing I will only say is that for me, what being well and living well means is trying to take my future self into consideration. Like I try really hard to make decisions that that at the end of my life I won't regret. And that I'm not just talking about really big decisions. I'm sometimes talking about really small decisions, like should I work that extra 5 hours and be on my computer tonight, or should I make sure that I get off that computer and go to bed? And yes, that means I might not be able to do some things tomorrow that, because I'll have to do the stuff I didn't do last night. Sometimes it means those things, but it might mean disappointing someone or even yourself in the moment. But in the long run, if you keep doing that, if I kept, it's very hard for me to get off my computer at night because I have more work than I can manage. Even in, if I work 24 hours a day, a lot of people have that experience. There are a lot of people counting on me. Like all of these things are true. They're true for a lot of people. But in that moment, I try to remember, well, in the long run, if I keep doing this is going to be a problem. And I'm going to look back on my life and regret that I did this because it will have cost me something later, even if I can't feel the consequences of it now. And I think that's a way to live well. It's a way to manifest compassion for yourself in the present, but also for keeping your future self in mind. And I keep my future self in mind for my husband and for my kids and for my friends. And that's true for everybody. When I'm talking about managing, your body budget or managing your life to optimize, to be your best self, the best version of yourself, if you're a person who has at least one other person who counts on you or who depends on you, then you're also doing it for them too.
I think that's where the real fundamentals of self-compassion come in. When you give it to yourself, you can give more to others at the same time as well, which is the power of it. Lisa, I have absolutely loved speaking to you. We're going to have to get you back on and as well and speak about all the work that you're doing at the moment in the lab, which just sounds incredible. Everything about the brain and metabolism and the energy cost. We'd love to have you back on and speak about it. And I really do want to say, please go and get Lisa's books. 2 books, her newest book, which is amazing, the 7.5 lessons, let me say, we didn't even manage to get onto, of the brain, and also how emotions are made. So I'm going to put them in the show notes. But Lisa, thank you so much for talking us through all the neuroscience and psychology of emotions and our brain. And I hope we can get you back on very soon.
I would love it. Thank you so much for having me on.